The leader of the opposition, do you have to oppose anything that Mr. Holness says? Is that case where, like, let's say Mr. Holness say, let's just grow trees, because trees are good, and you're like, no, cut down the tree just because you're in the opposition.
Well, that would be moronic, that would make no sense at all. So, no, it is not the case that you oppose everything that they do or say.
Hey guys, welcome back to Carib 21, and today we have another amazing episode for you. And today we're breaking down the election 2025 in Jamaica. Things are heating up. The election could be any time between September, October, and we are breaking it all down. And in today's episode, I want to focus on the podcast space. So we have seen we're now in Jamaica that the leaders, the two political leaders, Dr. Andrew Holness and Mark Golding, that they are now in the podcast space. Mark Golding was the first one to do a podcast interview in Jamaica, and recently we saw the Prime Minister of Jamaica doing a podcast, and this is a new era that we're entering, because normally during the election we see traditional media; those are the ones that cover the election. But with what we saw in the American election and the important part that the independent media space played in that election, now we see Jamaica heading into that direction. So in today's episode, I want to break down the two podcasts that the two political leaders went on, and we'll see which one was the big winner coming out of this podcast. The battle of the podcast, I'm going to call it. So let's talk about the two podcasts that the political leaders decided to go on, because to be honest, they could have been on several different podcasts, but there's a reason why they chose these two. So we're going to take a look at the two podcasts, and we're going to see the mindset behind the leaders, why they entered in these spaces. So first, Let's Be Honest. Let's Be Honest is a podcast, I would say, for 30 and under. It's like an entertainment podcast. They deal with current entertainment topic and some like hot takes in Jamaica. And Let's Be Honest is, I would say, the number one podcast in Jamaica for 2024 heading into 2025. And the host of that podcast, Jeffrey, I've been following this podcast for, I think, over 3 years. I've been following this podcast since Jeffrey was living in Atlanta until he relocated to Jamaica, where he thought that, look, if I'm going to be talking about Jamaican entertainment, I should go back home to Jamaica. And he went back to Jamaica, and the podcast blew up in like the space of just like 6 months. He was pretty much the number one podcast in Jamaica. So the opposition leader, Mark Golding, this is the podcast that Mark Golding chose to go on. And I believe that it was strategic, not just about engaging with young voters, but the Let's Be Honest podcast is like the cool space. And Mark Golding, I believe, want to come off as this cool politician that's up to the time with the trend, everything that's going on in Jamaica. So Let's Be Honest was the podcast that he chose. And I went through the two different podcasts, and I just chose one question from each podcast that I thought that is very important to me. So the first podcast I'm going to focus on is the Let's Be Honest podcast. And the question that Jeffrey asks the opposition leader, what would a PMP government do for housing for young people, young professionals in Jamaica, whether people leaving university in decent paying jobs but still can't afford a home, or people, young people in Jamaica that are pretty much working minimum wage jobs and they can't afford a home. So this is the question from Jeffrey, Let's Be Honest podcast.
Young people nowadays, including myself, you probably think I'm in my 30s, but I'm not. The housing market is crazy.
It is.
And then when you look for minimum wage, and that's where like professionals, people who come out of UE, spend a bunch of years, even doctors, and the pay with them I get, it not add up. No. Like as a person, I'm a resident of the States as well. Groceries in Jamaica, way more than America.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I mean, because we import.
Right.
I don't know what the PMP have planned for like make younger people can own some house, boy?
Well, we've been giving that a lot of thought, and we have some ideas. First of all, we want to establish within the NHT a fund to assist young people to get their deposit. Because at the time, the hard part is you have to have the deposit, whether it be 10% or whatever the deposit is. It's not usually more than 10, but it's often up there, and a lot of people just can't, because of the cost of living that they mentioned and how high it is and salaries being relatively low, they can't really save enough for the deposit to pay down on the house. So we want to establish a fund. We've said we're going to do that of $1 billion, where any young person who's been contributing to the NHT for at least 2 years would be entitled to a grant towards their deposit of $500,000. And that is something which has played well because people see the need for it. We also have, for persons who are informally employed, meaning that they don't have a job where the employer is, making payroll deductions and so on, and they don't have a pay slip. It's hard for them to establish their proof of income to qualify for a mortgage loan. And we have a thing called rent to own, which is an idea that we have put out there that we want to implement. So if somebody who is a successful blogger or whatever and is making money that way, or whatever they may be doing, buying and selling or whatever, but they don't have a pay slip, they can apply for an NHT house and they can go in as a tenant. And they, over a relatively short period of time, we're thinking about 6 months, the rent would be fixed at the same amount as the mortgage would be. Okay. And as long as they're current and show that they can make the payments over, say, 6 months, then they would qualify for the mortgage without having to produce a pay slip. And then they could just roll that up and then get the mortgage and buy the house. Similarly now, under the rent to own, there's another category of person now who is struggling. They're renting where they live now, but they don't have it. Times are so hard, they can't save for the deposit. And we would say, all right, they could rent an NHT house. And we would allocate a portion of their rental payments towards a deposit fund for them. So part of the rent would go, a good chunk of it would go into that rent account. And once your rent account equals the deposit that they need to pay, then they can draw down the mortgage and become the owner. So we're thinking about these things. We also want to over the last 12 years, $11.4 billion has been taken out of the NHT every year towards the budget. And it has really depleted the NHT of its cash resources and made it difficult for them to do the kind of transformational development of housing, affordable housing in particular, that really was the mandate for which they were established back in the 1970s under Jamaica mandate. So we want to recapitalize the NHT with lands, public lands that are suitable for housing, and then they can develop those lands in affordable housing solutions and sell them. And we are not going to charge the purchaser of the house for the land portion of it. We're going to exclude that from the price, which means if instead of an affordable house, say, costing $14 million, it may cost 11 or something, that kind of range based on our calculations. So that will immediately do two things. So one, it will make the house more affordable, especially for young professionals or persons who are just getting started in the home ownership game. And secondly, when they buy it, they will immediately have some equity in it because they would have got the house without having had to pay for the land portion of the value. And that would be a benefit to them. And they can now, use that in the future as part of their asset base and their own personal and family wealth. So these are some of the ideas that we have. There are a few other things we want to do as well. For some of our existing NHT borrowers, public servants, for example, there was a policy in place that they got a discount on the interest rate on their mortgage loan for being a public servant. That was taken away from them. We want to put that back in place for them. For the borrowers at the lowest band, which is, I think, persons who earn up to $30,000 a week, they are in the lowest band. Right now, the insurance on the house, which is part of what they pay each month in their mortgage payment, has gone up because insurance rates, because of climate change and so on, insurance is getting more expensive. We said that we will let the fund absorb, the NHT will absorb the mortgage costs for that category of borrower and give them a break, So those are some of the things. There are a couple of other things, like, for example, for public sector workers, again, right now, the way that the NHT assesses whether you're eligible to borrow, is what they call the debt service coverage ratio, which is a relationship between the monthly payment and your monthly income. Yeah. And you can't be more than a certain percentage of that. And for the public sector workers, we're going to increase that percentage to give them more lee room to borrow a bit more so they can afford a house more easily. So we're really looking at the housing thing and trying to see how we can solve the problem. So we plan to do a major build out over the next 5 years of affordable housing, because that's really been a gap over the last 10 years or so. There's been a lot of construction of new buildings and new houses, but typically they're at prices that are not really within outer range for most of
Okay, so that was the opposition, Mark Golding, on the Let's Be Honest podcast with the host Jay Frey. And I think that this was a really good interview. And I think it's a wise idea for the political leaders to enter this space, because look, this is the space of the future. There are more people now that have their cell phone watching videos, and most of the content that people are consuming now is not from traditional media, not from TV, not from cable anymore. People are tuning to their cell phones. So I think this move was a big move. And as I said, I believe that he went on this interview, on this podcast, because, it's one of the coolest podcasts in Jamaica. And the young audience, the 30 and under, you would be able to capture that audience. So in terms of strategically trying to get those people interested in voting, I think what he set out to do was accomplished with this podcast. I think he answered the questions well, and it was a very good interview. And I'm going to leave the full interview, because the interview is over an hour. So I'm going to leave a link to the full interview in the comment section so you can go and watch this interview. And I must say this, as a Jamaican that grew up in Jamaica in the 70s, for anyone that's born in the 70s or before, would agree that the 70s into the 80s was the worst political time in Jamaica's history. Between 1970 to about 1985 or so, it was the worst of Jamaica history politically. So as a Jamaican, I am very proud. I'm a very proud Jamaican now that we can see in 2025 that we can have two leaders running for political office and two intelligent men running for office. When you put these men against other political leaders in the world, we have some of the best in terms of educated politicians in Jamaica. And the fact that in 2025, we no longer, I don't think we're at the level that we were back in the 70s, where you have to worry if you vote JLP or PMP in terms of like violence. I think that people are very intellectual now when they're voting, and people are now this tribal politics that we used to have back in the 70s and the 80s. I think it's pretty much a thing of the past. So whether you're PMP or JLP, I believe that all Jamaicans can be proud that now we are in a political climate where, as I said, maturity is the order of the day. That whether you vote JLP, PMP, like, it's no more political turmoil. And the election result, the same night the election result is read out, like the opposition, the person who lost the election can come out and concede. In the 70s, in the 80s, that was not the case. So as a Jamaican, I'm very proud. Here at Carib 21, I'm on a mission to showcase the vibrant culture and the breathtaking beauty of the Caribbean while showcasing our culture and what is trending. If you want to support me on this mission, please subscribe. And if you also want to support, you can hit the comment section and buy me a cup of coffee. In order to buy me a cup of coffee, you can follow these instructions. Just click more. You will see the link to buy me a cup of coffee. Click the link. You can purchase 1 or 2 cups of coffee, and you'll be helping me to fulfill this mission. Thank you. Okay then, so let's take a look at the Prime Minister of Jamaica, Dr. Andrew Holness, the most honorable Dr. Andrew Holness, on the podcast that he chose to go on. And this podcast is a more mature audience, I would say. And this is Throp, Throp. And this Throp, Winthrop Wellington, I think his name is, he he was not born in Jamaica. He was born in America. His dad is Jamaican. His dad started a hotel in Negril. I had the opportunity, the privilege to stay at that hotel a few years ago, and I must say it's one of those small hotels on the Negril strip, that 7 Mile Beach strip, and it's an amazing hotel. I had a wonderful time there, and supporting local business. So he returned to Jamaica. Well, he moved to Jamaica years ago and took over the hotel from his dad, and he's also now in the podcast space. And his podcast is about encouraging Jamaicans in the diaspora to go back to Jamaica and to invest in Jamaica. So this is a different podcast from the Let's Be Honest podcast. And this is the podcast that the Prime Minister of Jamaica, Dr. Andrew Holness, chose to go on. So you can see the different mindset in these two political leaders where they were heading. So the question that Throp asks the Prime Minister of Jamaica, Andrew Holness, is about returning residents, and that over the past couple of years that we have seen a lot more Jamaicans choosing to return back to Jamaica to retire or to invest in Jamaica. And I can attest to that because I've seen the trend. Living in Canada, I've seen a lot of Jamaicans pack up and go back to Jamaica. So this is the question that Throp asks Dr. Andrew Holness, and this was the answer.
Moving to a different subject of really focusing on the diaspora, I've noticed from my platform a surge in interest from Jamaicans who are living abroad in considering more so than ever before of moving here, investing here, retiring back in Jamaica. And I think it is being driven by, one, what's happening globally and uncertainty that's arising around the world, and also the political climate in some of these countries. But I also am seeing on the other side of that coin is that they are looking at Jamaica differently. They are looking at Jamaica as turning into an economic powerhouse that it wasn't before. They are physically seeing the infrastructure improvements that are happening here. And I think one of the biggest draws in raising this interest is the decrease in major crimes, particularly the murder rate. And I believe we're down 40%, if I'm not mistaken, year over year. And so I think the combination of the two is really getting these folks looking at Jamaica very, very differently. So my question to you is, from your perspective, like what is motivating this? And also, why do you think now is the right time for people to invest in Jamaica, not only from an emotional standpoint, but from an economic and strategic standpoint?
Well, I like to tell the story this way. Jamaica is at an inflection point. And the best way to describe the inflection point, it's the point where the rate of results exceed the rate of effort. So you're going to start to see wise business people saying investments in Jamaica are going to yield greater returns than investments elsewhere because of the rate of change that is positive change that is happening in Jamaica. So if you take all the economic issues, if you're an investor, and you're looking for a safe place to put your wealth, to invest. And somehow, just to be clear, when I'm saying investment, I'm not talking, moving funds to put it in a bond or something. I mean, that's investment, yes, and you do. But let's take the investor who is looking to buy property, start a business, and get on the ground floor of investment. So you're not just going to want to look at what the macroeconomics are saying. You're going to also want to hear about what is crime in the country like, what's the healthcare service in the country like, what's the public transportation, what's the road infrastructure, what's the energy stability. All of those other things come into play. Mm-hmm. So clearly, on the macroeconomic side, institutional protection for our legal and justice system, our stated fiscal policy, which are transparent and predictable, central bank management, which is independent, clear, and strong. you can invest money in Jamaica. But we want to get people who are going to actually come here and create jobs as well. And that's what's happening. That people are seeing Jamaica as a place where you can get involved in, investments, right? Now, it's not perfect, but compared to other destinations, Jamaica is a safe place to do business. And we're taking the right decisions, which are creating this point of inflection. So let's look at the point of inflection and how we're going to make it move even faster, the developments that we want move even faster. One, in our next administration, we will focus on efficiency, the removal of unnecessary bureaucracy. Because a business environment that is efficient for all, that is transparent, that integrates technology, that gives you space to innovate, is an asset. It's a competitive advantage. And so we're going to invest in building this competitive advantage so that people choose to come to do business and live in Jamaica. Look, countries can have oil, they can have lots of natural resources, but all the countries that do well, including the countries that have oil or other natural resources, what makes them do exceptionally well is that their regulatory environment is easy to maneuver. Mm-hmm. And that's where Jamaica needs to be. We need to create an environment for business and for people who just want to come and live. Mm-hmm. That's easy to maneuver. Straight, easily understood. But we do have a culture which essentially says that if it doesn't take long, it wasn't well done. And we need to get rid of that culture if we're going to survive in this new age. And it's a really contradictory culture. Because we are the fastest people in the world. We have the fastest man in the world and the fastest woman in the world. We should never be slow at business. And it's about creating the track on which our people can run fast. And that's going to, if we get to that point, that inflection point, you will see change moving even more rapidly.
Okay, so that was the Prime Minister of Jamaica, Dr. Andrew Holness, on the question about Jamaicans returning back to Jamaica and about building a Jamaica that, like professional Jamaicans coming back from overseas, can feel comfortable to come back and to invest and to know that this Jamaica that they're coming back to in 2025 is different from the Jamaica that they left, whether 20, 30, 10 years ago. So that was the Prime Minister of Jamaica. So sound off in the comment section and let me know what are your thoughts about these two strategy with these podcast space. Are you happy to see the political leaders of the two main parties in Jamaica being in these independent podcast space? And do you think that this was a good idea? And which one did you enjoy more of these two podcasts? And as I said, I'm going to leave the link in the comment section so you can watch the full episodes because it's over an hour. And as I said, as a Jamaican, I believe that all Jamaicans should be proud of where we are politically. Yes, we talk about corruption in politics all the time, about political leaders coming in poor and enriching themselves. But the reality is that this is not just a Jamaican problem. Like, we can see what is going on in the US right now in terms of billionaires funding the election and billionaires getting tax break. So corruption is not exclusive to small Caribbean nations, especially Jamaica at this particular time. So, but as I said, coming from the 70s and the 80s as a Jamaican, I am proud to see the progress, the political progress that we have made. And even though, in my personal opinion, which I've said a few times, I believe it's going to be almost impossible for the People's National Party to win because of the deficit. Because the last election, they pretty much got wiped out. So to come back, they're going to need a historic comeback in order to win this election. But I feel comfortable as a Jamaican with whether PMP or JLP winning this upcoming election, because I think that Jamaica, we are at, as the Prime Minister said, we're at an inflection point where I think that we are mature enough as Jamaicans to go forward, for Jamaica to go forward, whether it's JLP or PMP. And that is just my thinking. So guys, sound off in the comment section. Let me know your thoughts on this one. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing content. And remember, peace. I'm out.